Well, I mean, they influence our elections in many ways.
Yeah, they certainly do.
I mean, I kind of alluded to it in the show, but I think the biggest hoax going is the idea that the Russia collusion is a hoax.
Yeah,
it's not a hoax.
So that was Bill Maher, controversial comedian and political commentator from the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, alongside Morning Joe MSNBC host Joe Scarborough and pro-Kamala billionaire, I almost said Elon Musk, Mark Cuban, not Elon Musk, laying down some crucial fact checks about a long-standing myth that the Russia investigation was a hoax when in fact it was not, and we're going to get more into that. And actually, I have a co-pilot for this. Much like Maher himself, I too have a co-pilot, one of, some would say, the best in the business, Luke Beasley of The Luke Beasley Show. What's going on, Luke?
Josiah, hearing your voice is just, my day is already better.
Well, given how close this election is and how close we are to the election, I imagine every little bit helps, doesn't it, buddy?
Yeah, we've been texting, but it's getting tight. And
it is.
I just want this all to be over.
I know, it's a real nail biter. I want to say before we get in any election talk, let's go ahead and play this segment of the greater fact check provided by Maher and Joe Scarborough against this Russia Gate hoax myth, because it is in fact not a hoax. And then we'll see you on the other side.
They influence our elections in many ways.
Yeah, they certainly do.
I mean, I kind of alluded to it in the show, but I think the biggest hoax going is the idea that the Russia collusion is a hoax.
Yeah,
it's not a hoax.
It's not.
There was collusion. Just because Bob Mueller was bad at proving it, there was definitely collusion.
That's one of the more maddening things. I still read the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the op-eds, and it's sort of my go-to in the morning. And it's maddening to even see people on there talking about Russia hoax. And you just want to say, read the Mueller report.
Yeah.
Read everything that's happened. Ask yourself why, time and time again, Donald Trump's doing things that make no sense. Why does he say in Helsinki in 2018 regarding Russia, I trust Vladimir Putin more than my own intel agencies? Why? As I always tell my kids, if something doesn't make sense, there's a good reason it doesn't make sense.
And it's more dangerous.
So I should say, to kind of set the table, the reason that I found that clip so interesting is because one of the things that Trump and MAGA Republican politicians and MAGA influencers like to cite is this idea that Democrats perpetrated a hoax against Donald Trump when he was president, the Russiagate hoax. It wasn't a hoax, Luke. It wasn't. And the thing that's so frustrating about this is so many people in this country now believe it was a hoax because Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans say it was, and we're so many years out from this. So, I guess I'm going to lob it to you, but isn't it frustrating at how good MAGA Republicans and Trump are at really tricking us and deceiving our short-term memories?
It is, and I understand that culturally this happens where a phrase like, that's offensive, or that's Russiagate, you can weaponize certain phrases to shut down conversations, and then it makes people who haven't really either looked into the topic at hand or have sort of forgotten the details of it, weary to bring something up at all, like the just concerning connections between members of the Trump campaign to Russians, the concerning way that Trump talks about Putin and other authoritarians, the way that he sided with Putin over his intelligence agencies, etc. But if you don't want to be screamed, that's all Russiagate, and you're not exactly ready to defend the position comprehensively, then a lot of people just go, okay, yeah, sure. I guess that's a topic that's off the table. I get that that's not just a MAGA thing, but they do it really well, and it reminded me of at the Democratic National Convention, Stephanie Grisham, who worked for Donald Trump, says something that I've referenced a bunch of times just on my show because it really answers the question of what is Trump doing in a lot of scenarios, which is Grisham was told by Trump something to the effect of, no matter what you say, as long as you repeat it enough, people will believe it. And so Trump realized that while, of course, there were liberal commentators out there and probably Democratic politicians who overstated what would eventually be discovered in the investigation by Mueller, or overstated Trump's accountability, what might happen to him there were definitely bad predictions made and hyperbole, as happens constantly. MAGA, you definitely don't want us to bring that back around with you, with all the crazy things you said about Biden. But at the core, those concerning connections and the way that Trump has invited election interference publicly in front of the world by Russia during the 2016 campaign, that you can't just wave all away with, oh, that's Russiagate. But because Trump repeated enough times, Russia, 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 he's convinced, even I've heard a lot of left-wing commentators use that phrase to say it was all a hoax. And so I am not ignoring that there were people misstating and overstating what would eventually be discovered and what criminality was being engaged in by Trump himself, or at least what could be proven. And some of that, it didn't actually manifest. But we also can't be missing what was discovered and the criminality by those around Trump that was discovered.
Man, you just said so many things that we got to hit on. But since you referenced, Trump's public request to Russia to interfere in the election, we should probably play that clip. It's important to remember that candidate Donald Trump in 2016 at a press conference looked the camera in the eye, spoke to Russia, and asked them to directly interfere in the 2016 election by targeting Hillary Clinton. Here's the clip for proof.
You see, I will tell you this. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Let's see if that happens. That'll be next. Yes, sir.
So, Luke, and I'm sure, because obviously I want to lean into a lot of what you confront when you talk to Trump supporters at the Trump rallies. I recently had my first experience with that. We should probably talk about that at some point. But you're a veteran in that. And so I know Russia and Russiagate comes up a lot. What's so interesting is I have to imagine that when you drop that on Trump supporters, he actually publicly asked Russia, a foreign adversary, to interfere in the election by targeting his political opponent, Hillary Clinton, that Trump supporters will say something to the effect of either, no, it didn't happen, and then when you show them the clip, they'll say, well, you can't take him literally, he was just joking. I do want you to comment on that, but before you do, I do want to clarify. We know from Justice Department investigations, including the Mueller report, that on or about the same day that Trump made that public request, Russia did, in fact, do just that they targeted Secretary Hillary Clinton's emails and her social media. They were trying to dig dirt on her on or around the same time that Trump publicly asked them to. That is a fact. That is not a matter of opinion. But I do want to ask you, when you bring this up to Trump supporters, what do they say?
I mean, just Russia, Russia, Russia. Oh, you're bringing up Russia again. Because to me, less relevant now, even though it kind of should be, but less relevant is all that was discussed 2016 and the next few years after that. And what I find the Russia, Russia, Russia defense being thrown out in relation to most often when I'm talking to people is when I point to the role that Russian intelligence allegedly played in stoking all of these theories about Biden's corruption and Alexander Smirnov's connections there. And that gets swatted down because people have been so numbed to the idea that Russia has attempted to put their finger on the scale. Now, to be clear, given that we now live in this world where election denialism is so present because of MAGA, Russia running social media operations or trying to get access to information or pushing out false information about Biden, none of that makes Trump an illegitimate president. If he's lawfully elected through our democratic process, we should always be taking steps to prevent foreign countries from interfering, meddling, but he still was elected lawfully and legitimately. So that we can keep clear. But why does this have to be a partisan thing? I feel like MAGA, given that they act like they're all for election security and integrity, we could, regardless of which country's trying to help who, we could unite around preventing such meddling. But no, whenever it comes up in relation to Trump, because there's the sensitivity that, are you trying to say that he wasn't elected legitimately? They won't engage at all to answer your question with that concern.
No, and you know, it's frustrating too. And I'm thinking of something that Joe Scarborough said during that panel, which is, you know, there's been polling about this, and so many MAGA Republicans respect and admire and support Vladimir Putin than President Joe Biden himself. And this goes back to something I've been saying for years, and I think an increasing number of commentators in our space are more aware of this, which is I sincerely believe that the state of politics is such that were we to experience another domestic attack here in this country, God forbid, that the MAGA partisanship is such that there would be attacks against President Biden or a Democratic president rather than uniting behind the president the way that we were expected to in times past. I recall vividly after the September 11th terrorist attacks, this idea was you couldn't even criticize President Bush or Republicans, even in good faith, because it was a time of crisis. And at the end of the day, politics stops at the water's edge, and you're supposed to unite as a country. I don't believe that ethos exists in the Republican Party today. If a Democrat's in charge and something bad happens, be it a pandemic or a terrorist attack, there's more sympathy for the foreign adversary among many MAGA Republican politicians, at the very least, than there are fellow Democrats. And that it reflects the rhetoric of Trump that we've seen during this election cycle, where he refers to his fellow Americans, but people who simply just disagree with him or won't vote for him, as the enemy within, worse than foreign adversaries. And so, to your point, I think there's a through line here. The reason this is still so important is because, number one, it's a lie to say that Russiagate was a hoax. It was not. And the truth, it just matters in and of itself. There's an inherent value to it. 34 people were either convicted or pled guilty as part of Robert Mueller's investigations into the connections between Russia and the Trump campaign and Trump administration. That's a fact. Donald Trump personally pardoned two of his top advisors, Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, after they were convicted as a consequence of these investigations. Russia continues to meddle in our elections. We learned recently that Donald Trump was sending precious COVID test machinery to Putin at a time when millions of Americans were clamoring for this stuff and tens of thousands of Americans were dying. Trump, quite frankly, showed more concern for the life of a foreign dictator than he did his own constituents as the sitting president. There's a through line all the way to 2024. It is still relevant, and it seems like so many people are willing to sweep it under the rug. Last thing I'll say before throwing it back to you, I think you made a really good point that this rhetoric is so infectious, Luke, that many people on our side, quote unquote, have also thrown an unnecessary bone to MAGA Republican politicians by saying, yeah, Russiagate was a hoax. No. Maybe Rachel Maddow overstated the severity or the strength of the connections between Russia and Putin, but that doesn't mean this was a hoax. This was a problem, and there was too much of an incestuous relationship between the Trump campaign and Russia, and anyone who says otherwise is quite frankly lying.
I find it super fascinating how you're sort of connecting, describing it as a through line, all the different ways that this same underlying ideological issue has reared its ugly head. And now I would say a big way that we're seeing this again is the way that MAGA approaches Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene scream about how Zelensky needs to stop war. I've heard Trump just recently say Zelensky never should have let that invasion happen. I've heard them blame the United States. I've heard them blame about everything NATO, our Western allies. I've never heard MAGA. That's a really general statement. Let me clarify. I've never heard some of these top people that we cover on a daily basis, like Trump, like Marjorie, engage with the fact that Russia every single day is choosing not to have peace. They act like Biden is a warmonger for giving Ukraine aid when Russia could stop the war immediately by stopping invading. Ukraine can't just stop the war immediately other than giving everything to Russia, which would only encourage further aggression so that they could get more because they would have learned that lesson. And the same siding with Russia, siding with Putin, the same disturbing ideological alignment between that government and that figure and MAGA in the United States is once again, in the most consequential way, rearing its ugly head, causing our allies to reportedly be terrified of a Trump presidency, Zelensky to be terrified, because this could be not just an attack on democracy domestically, but globally.
Yeah, I think those are all outstanding points, and it's another reason why there's a clear preference by so many foreign nefarious actors like Putin, I'm sure Xi Jinping and others, a clear preference for Donald Trump to become president again. The last thing I'll say, Tina, all the way back to the Russiagate investigation by Robert Mueller is this. Robert Mueller found credible evidence that then President Trump tried to obstruct justice. And the only reason that he was not recommending charges to be brought against then President Trump, who tried to obstruct justice for that investigation, was because he was the sitting president. And longstanding Justice Department tradition dictates that you cannot prosecute a sitting president. So the last thing I want to leave our viewers with is this. We already have precedent that when Donald Trump is president, that the wheels of justice will not prosecute him because of longstanding tradition. And now we are living in the aftermath, the dangerous shadow of the Trump v. United States decision by the Supreme Court, which gives sweeping, almost sovereign immunity to former presidents. So friends, if you're eligible voters, I want you to keep this in mind. Donald Trump will never be held accountable for anything he does if you give him back the keys to the White House. If for no other reason, that is why I believe eligible voters should turn out en masse and vote against him in November. The stakes are too high. Luke, where can people find you on YouTube?
Beautiful articulation of the stakes there. That issue alone should decide it for people. You can find me at Luke Beasley on YouTube. Great to be with you, Josiah.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it.